I'm really excited to be recording a solo episode today. You all know that I love to bring guests on to talk about their passions and areas of expertise, and while I continue to do that, this is one area that I feel very well qualified to talk about, and I'm excited to share a little of my own expertise with you today. For those who don't know, I was a wedding and special event planner for close to a decade. I had the joy of working with some incredible clients here in the Philadelphia area, won some awards that I'm proud of along the way, and really poured my heart into making every event special. Ultimately, though, I decided to close my company, but my passion for entertaining, gathering, and celebrating with loved ones has never gone anywhere. This time of the year, especially Thanksgiving, is such a fun, perfect moment to bring those skills into the home and create a beautiful, memorable experience for the people we love. So today, I'm sharing some professional insights that will help you get ready for Thanksgiving, not just with things you can Google, but with a practical timeline, some real tried and true tricks to make the day seamless and enjoyable. Now again, because this is my professional background, this is really meant to be technical. It is technical, but I hope that it fills in the gaps of all of those resources you have found online and still had questions about. Let's jump in. Welcome to Grandma's Silver, where tradition meets today. I'm Allie, your host and the founder of the Grandmillennial Lifestyle. Here, we blend aesthetics with nostalgia, engaging in conversations with lifestyle brands, designers, and more to rediscover the timeless charm of the past. Join me as we journey from home to heart, illuminating the past and polishing the present with the gleam of Grandma's Silver. All right, grab your notebooks, take some notes. This is hopefully going to be comprehensive, but I also don't want it to feel overwhelming. So some of this will apply to you, some of it's not applicable. Take what you need and let it help you. The first step is to build a timeline. Now, I live for a schedule. I make an over-the-top, way too detailed in some people's eyes timeline, down to basting the turkey every 30 minutes, and I write that down. If you don't want to be that precise, that is okay. So the first thing that I will say is make your timeline work for you. If it stresses you out to look at and it's too much, that's fine. Without that much detail, I feel like I'm forgetting something. So I always include it, and if I don't baste exactly every 30 minutes, we all survive. But that's just the first thing we have to lay out there. Now, of course, the timeline, I always recommend, you need one of some kind. It does, again, how precise it is entirely up to you, but it is a critical element in making the day run smoothly. It is also all about working backwards from your dinner time and setting clear milestones, I guess we'll call them, for the day. So on that note, the first thing you need to do is figure out what time you want to eat. Now, let's say you would like to serve dinner at 5. That becomes your anchor point. That's the moment that you want to have everything either on the table, on the countertop, ready to go, spoons in casserole dishes, ready to serve. Don't worry just yet about what time people are arriving, what time you need to have nibbles, drinks for people to snack on. That comes later. We're starting with our dinner time, and then we're going to work backwards. So the other thing we'll do, just for example's sake, is break down a traditional Thanksgiving meal. So we'll focus on common dishes today, like turkey, stuffing or dressing for my southern friends, mashed potatoes, green beans, cranberry sauce, those sorts of things. Make a comprehensive list of all of the dishes you plan to serve or that folks are bringing that you may need to reheat or accommodate. Don't forget about things like dinner rolls, cranberry sauce, even if it's coming from a can, pies, even if they're store-bought. The idea, though, is that in order to proceed from here, you need to have recipes handy and you need to know what folks are bringing. Now, things like dessert get a little easier if you've assigned people dessert, wine. Some folks are bringing appetizers. Those are great things to assign to people because they don't really impact your cooking timeline or your prep timeline too heavily. So if you haven't already made assignments to folks who are offering to bring things, those are some of my favorites to outsource. Now again, depending on your menu, this may or may not be applicable, but for most of us, the turkey is both the most critical cooking item and also takes some of the longest amount of time to cook. So I like to start with it. Right off the bat, I will tell you, weigh your turkey to know both how long it needs to thaw and how long it needs to cook. If you're buying it from the store and you've never really done this before, the weight is listed on the sticker. It's also often how they price it. This is an important little tidbit, and I have fallen victim to this myself. I purchased a turkey based on the recommended quantity of dinner guests, but it didn't fit in my freezer, in my refrigerator. I had to store it at my parents' that year to thaw. So be mindful of your storage space before shopping. You may need to prepare alternate accommodations for your thawing turkey or plan to buy multiple smaller ones. In any case, once you know the weight, you need to calculate the cook time. Now, the rule of thumb is something like 15 minutes per pound at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, but there are so many recipes out there that call for different approaches, different temperatures, so take this with a grain of salt. The math is still important though. If you are planning to serve your dinner at 5 and the turkey takes 3 hours to roast, a half hour to rest before carving, write that down, map that out. This is also preferential. We have done this both ways. We've carved the turkey at the table, but we've also learned that it's easier and we seem to get more meat off of the bone if we carve in advance and serve the turkey on a platter. We've also found that that's easier to warm the turkey and keep things warm. We can just cover it with foil and then keep going with our menu. To each their own, but build that kind of thing into the timeline too, depending on which you want to go with, so that you're not scrambling and trying to carve and do this beautiful presentation on a platter while people are hovering over you in the kitchen. Turkey prep should also be counted as part of its cook time, and we'll separate those things out in a minute. But don't forget about timing when it comes to letting the turkey rest after you take it out of the refrigerator, giving yourself time to, take the innards out, to season the bird, to stuff the bird. If your recipe calls for something like brining, you're looking at multi-days of prep. So again, adjust your timeline accordingly. Going along with having all your recipes and planning out your cook times, and the reason I bring this up at this point is because it may impact where you stick things on your timeline. I used to try and do everything on my oven, or I would do things in advance, but then I still found that a lot of that advanced prep was stressing me out just because I felt like, I have a regular tiny kitchen, I'm in a little tiny colonial, and I just didn't have the ability to reheat things how I wanted. Now I make my mashed potatoes on the stove, and then I actually mash them with my KitchenAid. I just put them in my KitchenAid mixer now and use the paddle attachment, and it does a great job with that. And then I transfer them to my crock pot, and they stay warm all day. I don't have to worry about them. I don't have to worry about reheating them. I can do the same thing with stuffing. If you are able to borrow crock pots, I can roast my sweet potatoes in the Instapot, mash them in there as well while the turkey is in the oven. So you have workhorse appliances. My point is just don't be afraid to use them. Anyway, back to cooking. So once the turkey is in the oven, you're looking at mapping out the cooking for everything else using that same backward planning method. So a sample breakdown would be that, again, dinner's 5 o'clock. We need the turkey to rest closer to 4 o'clock because it needs a good 30 minutes to rest, which also gives you time to carve, to serve. You can also use that time to start reheating any dishes that have already been prepped, which by 4 o'clock, if you have a 5 o'clock dinner, should be most of them. So again, my recommendation is to use other appliances to help with the reheating, because I think that's actually one of the most difficult parts of getting the food out and ready for everyone at the same time. But if you are not, when that turkey comes out somewhere around 3:30 or 4, just immediately lower it a little bit and then pop pre-cooked side dishes like mashed potatoes, stuffing, casseroles back in. Those generally take somewhere from 20 to 40 minutes to reheat, and it's okay to give them a little stir. That can help speed things along. And then closer to that 3:30 p.m., again, assuming we have a 5 o'clock dinner, is any last minute side dishes. So if you're doing a fresh stovetop green bean, not a casserole, that's something that you could easily do. Cranberry sauce, if you are making it from scratch, that's something that you can do. So that last hour or so, you would be doing stovetop items. Now, speaking of stovetop, that brings us back to different cooking methods. So generally, Thanksgiving, we're seeing oven space. So most Thanksgiving dishes need to be baked. Oven space can become a premium. If multiple dishes need to go in the oven at the same time, prioritize by cook time and temperature. So the turkey is your anchor, but you can often adjust side dish cook time slightly or use the stovetop to help speed that along. I often will do my stuffing on the stovetop and then transfer it to a casserole dish to reheat later. Other items that can be cooked entirely on the stovetop that frees up space in the oven. Again, green beans. They can be sauteed, they can be steamed. Gravy can be made with the turkey drippings as soon as the bird comes out of the oven. I have often done Brussels sprouts in a skillet. You can do the slow cooker. Like I said, for dishes like stuffing, mashed potatoes, it just either speeds things up or frees up oven space. Slow cookers can also be really good for dishes that just cook for a longer time so that you're not relying on the oven. And Instant Pots allow you to cook things like side dishes, mashed potatoes in a fraction of the time. Like I mentioned, I roast and mash sweet potatoes in that. Now, oven temperature is a conversation all its own. Everyone's oven is a little different. Hopefully, if you are cooking the Thanksgiving meal, you have a pretty good sense of what works for your house, your oven. Most Thanksgiving dishes that you are baking at 350. My personal turkey recipe starts somewhere at 400 or 425, but that's only for the first however long. So then it drops down. And then again, it makes it easy to both cook casseroles, to reheat things. So just play around and shift items as you need to. Now, I'm going to make sure on my Instagram to share my crazy detailed prep timeline. But for the sake of this podcast, the example, simple timeline for Thanksgiving dinner, if we were looking at doing turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, that kind of thing, we would be working backwards and saying, okay, 5 o'clock, we serve dinner. 4:30, we're carving it and bringing everything to the table for final touches. 4 o'clock, the turkey is coming out, it needs to rest. And then we're reheating things like mashed potatoes, stuffing, any dinner rolls. 3:30, we might have already started to reheat some of those side dishes in the oven. 2 o'clock, the turkey goes in, assuming it's 3 hours of cook time. 1 o'clock, we would be prepping the turkey, stuffing it, seasoning it, getting it in the oven. And by noon or at noon, we would be doing any fresh sides, green beans, cranberry sauce, that sort of thing. Again, for the sake of this episode, I'm not going to get too fixated on the actual timeline specifics because it really is recipe dependent. Some stuffing recipes need to bake for an hour, others take 30 minutes, so adjust your times accordingly and give yourself a little flexibility. It'll sometimes take longer than expected, and that's okay. Now, speaking of going backwards, again, that is just like your very preliminary loose outline of a schedule, because we have to talk about what you can do in advance of all of this to further minimize stress and make sure that your recipes are ready to go the next day. So when you are planning a meal like Thanksgiving, which is a very big meal, the more you can do ahead of time, the better. I've been there. The night before is really about getting things prepped so you can hit the ground running the next day. So things like chopping your vegetables. One of the best ways to make the morning easier is to tackle vegetable prep. So for dishes like stuffing, for gravy, you need onions, carrots, celery, maybe some fresh herbs. It is great to dice, chop, prep those vegetables the night before, store them in labeled containers, labeled Ziplocs. It saves you time and prevents you from scrambling to chop things at the last minute. And the last thing we all want to be doing on Thanksgiving is running the dishwasher 4 times. So think about the prep that you need for all of your dishes. Get ahead on anything that can be done without affecting the freshness, like sweet potatoes. Those can be peeled and cubed ahead of time too. Now, this is not something that I do, but I know some that like to do this, so I'll throw it out there. You could also pre-measure spices and herbs. Thyme for the turkey, rosemary for stuffing, sage for the gravy. You could measure them out individually, but it's also nice. You could do like a little kit. So if you know that the gravy requires a certain combination and it doesn't really matter what order they're incorporated, combine them, label it into a little ramekin, cover it and set it aside. And then that day when you're ready to cook with it, toss the whole thing in. Now, the only thing I will say about this is that you want to stock up on all of these things and make sure that you have it all in your pantry before Thanksgiving, and that's all part of your grocery prep. Which brings me to checking your grocery list. So really go through your recipes, make sure you have all of the ingredients, check your fridge for anything that maybe needs to chill overnight, like cranberry sauce, pies you've made ahead of time. This also includes anything that you might have frozen in advance, like bread rolls. If they need to thaw overnight, it's the time to pull them out of the freezer and make sure they're ready to go. If you have not taken your turkey out yet, I'm so sorry. It looks like you're getting fast food. Now, in all seriousness, something I've learned over years of event planning is to give yourself buffer time. Trust me, things take longer than you think, or something will happen and it will set you off track a bit. So whether it's a dish not reheating as quickly as you would like, setting up the table, getting the gravy ready, you don't want to feel rushed. So I build a 30-minute buffer in right before dinner. So that cushion gives you time to wrap up anything last minute, freshen yourself up, take a moment to breathe, have a glass of wine, relax. I promise it will feel like a gift when you can step back and appreciate everything coming together. On the subject of everything coming together, we want to further break this down so you can work efficiently on Thanksgiving Day and enjoy the process as much as possible instead of feeling frazzled. The key is staying on top of that timeline and delegating where possible. This isn't really just about the food, it's about creating a joyful, stress-free experience for you and your guests. Let's talk about the morning. Start Thanksgiving Day with an organized space. Give yourself breathing room. Avoid rushing. Here are some of the basics. If you haven't already, start by setting the table. Whether you're working with a big family-style dinner, a more intimate gathering, set the table first thing in the morning so that you don't need to worry about running around to place settings when everything else is ready to go. So, your table runner or your placemats, your dinner plates, your silverware, glasses, napkins, the centerpiece, make sure it's low enough for easy conversation. Name cards, if you have a mix of guests who need to find their seats, that can also be a lovely detail. Having the table ready early will free up your time for everything else. So again, if it's possible for you to set it the day before, do. But if you can't, prioritize it that morning. The other thing that I like to do first thing in the morning that I personally build into my timeline as some of my very first action items, if you will, is to check up on any prep I did the night before to make sure that it is truly ready to go so that I don't feel hurried when I'm ready to start cooking. So for me, that is taking out a butter mix that I pre-make that goes under the skin of the turkey when I bring it out to thaw. So I have to, before I even have my coffee, or while my coffee is brewing, I'll pull that out of the fridge, let it come to a little bit more of a room temp so that I can actually, it's a little more malleable. It's like it's softer so that I can actually use it. I don't want it to be melted. I want it to have like that lard consistency. So I do that. I also make my own stuffing. So I make sure that my, cubes of bread that are out on a baking sheet on the counter overnight are fine, that they're ready to go. If I have to transfer anything from the freezer, I suggested you do that the night before, but sometimes that could be something that you're doing in the morning. So again, just like setting yourself up for success before you start cooking. One of the first things you also want to handle, this could be more mid-morning, is beverages. We'll call it a station. We don't need to do a station, but we'll call it that for lack of a better phrase. If you're serving cocktails, you want to make sure your barware is ready, along with any bottles of wine, punch bowls you're planning on using. I love a punch bowl or a glass decanter for a signature drink, or even for non-alcoholic beverages. It just makes them feel a little more zhuzhed. Ice, that's an essential. Make sure you have enough on hand, especially if you are serving chilled drinks. You can either prep ice in the morning, get it delivered, run to the gas station. Don't forget to check on ice and fill large containers the night before so that you can transfer them to smaller buckets. I honestly usually just get enough for people to put in their drinks, but when it's just my family, we'll usually stick things like sodas and water bottles. If it's cold enough outside, I can put them on my porch in a cute little bucket, and no one has ever minded grabbing them there. The other thing that you would look at doing mid-morning is preparing any appetizers that you have adopted or that you have agreed to provide. So an actual cheese board, dips, vegetable platters, especially those kinds of items, make them earlier in the day, cover them tightly with plastic wrap, keep them chilled in the fridge till people arrive, and then also prep hot appetizers that could just be quickly reheated later in the day. Now, if we switch gears to things that you want to build into your timeline in the later part of the morning, we'd really be looking at your turkey and any final prep. So what I mean by that, if we look at turkey first, again, first priority, if you're roasting a whole turkey, you want it in the oven first because it can take several hours. So number one, and this is something, again, probably way too much, but something that I like to put on my timeline is literally telling myself to preheat the oven and at what temperature. Also making sure the turkey is properly seasoned and stuffed. Once the turkey goes into the oven, make sure you're setting a timer for any little milestone things. Again, I mentioned at the beginning of this episode that I stick 30-minute incremental reminders for myself to baste the turkey, to check the temperature. So all those little things, stick them on your timeline too. That was my dog. I'm not even going to edit him jumping out. So our next step as far as our timeline is making sure we're prepping and making time for any other dishes. So again, while that turkey cooks, what sides need to be prepped or even assembled? Casseroles that can be assembled ahead of time but baked later should be prepped at that time. Gravy ingredients that can be combined so when the turkey is out, you just need to make a quick sauce. Mashed potatoes can be prepped and kept warm if you have a slow cooker or a warming drawer. This is also the time that you need to send your spouse or your friend or whoever is helping you in the kitchen to go to the grocery store if you forgot anything or you opened something and it's disgusting, because the grocery stores have wonky hours and I feel like late morning is kind of that magic window. Now, the afternoon is really when you're in the thick of things. The turkey is probably starting to be done, is ready to come out of the oven soon, is out of the oven. We're working on finishing our sides. So again, mashed potatoes, they can be boiled and mashed now or reheated from earlier prep. Our stuffing and green beans or any other vegetable dishes that need to be sauteed, baked, they go into the oven at this point. If you are serving cranberry sauce, a salad, get those together, stick them back into the refrigerator. And then you also want to get ready to carve the turkey. So set yourself up with a cutting board, a sharp knife for when it's ready to rest and carve. And that is also a good time to ask someone to help carve while you finish everything else. About an hour, hour and a half before, we are working on reheating. So again, mashed potatoes, stuffing, any casseroles. You also want to check on your turkey to make sure that it's resting long enough before you carve, because there will be lots of juice. That's the other thing. If you've never carved a turkey, it's a mess. So make sure that you have plenty of little towels around, that you're doing it next to the sink maybe if you need to drain some of that liquid off if you're not using it for a gravy. Just be prepared for that. And on that same note, as we're talking about a mess, the last thing that you want is a kitchen full of crud before your guests show up. So take a minute to run the dishwasher, wash any dishes that you've used up to this point. That really just allows you to focus on enjoying the meal and your company instead of worrying about round 2 of time spent in the kitchen. Now, depending on when your guests are arriving, you may also need to build in time to freshen yourself up, to get the playlist on, to light the candles, just to generally set the ambiance. You have to figure out when the best time for that is, depending on when you've asked people to arrive versus what time you're serving the meal. Now, one of the other things that I do for myself, on top of having a day of timeline, is that I have something of a prep timeline. Now, what I mean by that is it's not as hour by hour as my cooking timeline, obviously, but I want to make sure that all those planning elements are just as organized. So there is a strategy to grocery shopping, to getting the house ready, to getting myself ready. So the grocery list, if we're talking about prep, that's the foundation. Having a well-organized list helps to prevent last-minute runs to the store and allows you to pace your shopping out over several weeks, several days. So one of the first things you really need to do is just a master list based on your recipes. And I will often go through and also try and figure out what people are bringing. So if someone is offering to bring pie, make sure you are writing whipped cream down on your grocery list because you can't guarantee that they're going to bring that. So organizing by category then also saves you time in the store and helps to make sure you have everything that you need, which that's just a general grocery list tidbit. I mean, I think most of us are doing that already, but if you're not, it saves you a lot of time. So again, what that looks like, fresh produce. So that's your onions, your celery, your carrots, your herbs, your green beans, your potatoes, then your pantry staples. So don't forget about, again, things like spices, flour, sugar, canned goods. Don't forget, again, cranberry sauce, that's a canned good. Any broth that you may need. Dairy. And the other thing to think about with dairy is that some grocery stores have caps on how many of any particular item, particularly when it comes to buttermilk and eggs. I've seen, max 4. So if you need 6 of something, just be sure to shop at either be planning to shop at multiple stores or be planning to go a couple of different times so that you can get what you need. Turkey, hopefully you have bought that well in advance. I have seen them sell out, so be mindful of that. And it's also okay to get frozen things like frozen, peeled, cubed sweet potatoes, butternut squash, vegetables. All those things are great, even desserts. Beverages. So in Pennsylvania, we have state stores for our wine, so that's a whole separate errand that we have to take. But if you're in an area where you can grab your wine at your grocery store, great. Your wine, your beer, ingredients for any signature cocktails, sparkling water, soda, that kind of stuff. On the subject of timing in grocery stores, if you're unfamiliar with grocery shopping around Thanksgiving, it is every man, woman, and child for themselves. Pack your patience because we're all in the same boat. Everyone is at the store for the same things. It's very congested. Everyone is in a hurry. So that is another reason why grabbing some of those heartier vegetables, those frozen items, those beverages, what they call non-perishables, is a great idea to do in advance because then when you do have to inevitably pop back in for things like pie that has a certain pickup date or last minute fresh ingredients, so those are things that will wilt or spoil quickly like delicate herbs or salad greens, we inevitably are going to have to grab those a day or two before Thanksgiving, and that is, again, when it's going to be very crowded, so just be mindful that the less you can have on that list, the better, because you kind of want to just be in and out. On that note, shopping in stages obviously will save you the most time and possibly your sanity. So just about now, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, is when we're looking at grabbing our non-perishable shelf-stable items, so any canned goods, spices, baking ingredients like flour and sugar, your wine, beer that hasn't yet been refrigerated. And if you are going with a frozen turkey, buy that now. Store it in the freezer until it's time to start thawing, which is usually about a week before Thanksgiving, depending on the weight. And then a week before Thanksgiving, what you want to grab is more of those pantry items like drinks, paper products, napkins, any tools that you are realizing you may need. drinks. I think I just said that. But also, you could start to grab those heartier vegetables like potatoes, squash, onions. They'll keep. Right before is when I usually try and grab ingredients like fresh herbs, more delicate vegetables like my celery, dairy products, pre-made pies, charcuterie ingredients, and then literally a day or two before is when I'm grabbing fresh bread, salad greens, any fresh bakery items, that kind of stuff. Are you still with me? Okay, good. Now, I feel like cleaning and house prep is its own separate conversation because who you host ultimately determines some of that. How you're using your home during the holiday often determines some of that. But if we're talking about the basics and you want to incorporate it, like I do sometimes, onto my timeline, here's what I recommend. So the weekend before is when I really start because I feel like, especially having a dog and we have people over often, I don't feel like I can really do a deep clean a month in advance and then count on it to all still be like sparkling and beautiful. So the weekend before is when I really do deep clean on key areas like the dining room, the living room, the kitchen, my bathrooms. If you need a kid-friendly space, that's just something to be thinking about. So if, I don't have children yet, so that's something that when we do have kids around, I try and plan ahead some little activities, make sure they have something that they could be doing. Also thinking about where they're sitting when it's time to eat. And more so, my husband, he's kind of our outdoor guy, but we also are just thinking about, okay, how does the yard look? What's our presentation, our curb appeal? We don't go crazy. I'm talking about things like sweeping the porch, raking leaves, making sure it doesn't look disgusting outside, just tidy and inviting. A couple of days before, I'm looking at just getting the guest bathrooms ready. So towels, hand soap, candles, toiletries, like tissues, hand soap. And in the kitchen, I try and just get it ready for me to be in there. So any counter space that I can free up, I do. If it means just temporarily putting things in the basement, I do it. It just makes my life easier Thanksgiving Day. The day before is really about final touches for me. So that's just dusting high traffic areas, vacuuming, setting up those extra tables or chairs, making sure the actual dining table place settings are in place. I don't want to worry about that the next day, so I do that in advance. I also, if you haven't already, make sure there's space in the refrigerator. So any unnecessary items, I'm tossing, I'm getting rid of anything in the refrigerator that does not need to be there. And then that morning, as far as the housework goes, I'm really just maybe like doing another quick vacuum, tidying up, fluffing pillows, getting rid of clutter. And then again, later in the day, before people are coming over, I'm getting that music on, candles get lit kind of just before we sit down, the fireplace goes on, all that kind of stuff. The only thing I'd like to add here is that as an event planner, one of the important parts of my job was preparing for the what ifs and preventing any potential problems before they happened and having easy to execute solutions if they did arise. So, some additional tips for you as far as guest flow and timing. Figure out what time people should arrive. Are family members dropping by early? Are others arriving just for dinner? That can affect the day's flow. You could have appetizers or light snacks ready for those early arrivers and pace the food to keep things moving smoothly without being overwhelmed yourself. I also know the importance of a transition time. So if you are going to have people arrive a little closer to dinner, that welcome, I won't say hour, but that little welcome period before dinner is really helpful so that people feel settled and can mingle before they're being asked to sit down, because that actually is kind of anxiety inducing and is not the energy that you want when you are trying to get an entire meal out on the table. I've interviewed so many incredible designers who have shared their insights on creating visual cohesion across the table. My own 2 cents is just making sure things are low enough that you can have conversation. I would also not worry too much about cohesion and being matchy-matchy. You can use a few coordinated colors or patterns in varying heights and textures. And I also suggest those focal points at the center, but also balancing the table, kind of like visual bookends, small candle clusters. It just creates harmony. Going back to that preparation, that contingency planning, it's just really about anticipating any what ifs. So if the turkey gets done early, how are you going to keep it warm so that it's not drying out? If folks are delayed in their arrival, how are you keeping side dishes fresh? And the other one is your table settings. Something could break. Someone could bring in unexpected guests. That's generally pretty unlikely, but you never know. So do you have something, even if it doesn't match everything else, that you can grab in a pinch? These are smaller items to think about, but if your family is planning on a toast, a prayer, are you prepared as the host to give that so that you don't feel on the spot? And one of the last things that I will leave you with is leftovers. How are you sending people home with food to go? Are you asking them to bring Tupperware? Are you prepared to purchase a bunch of inexpensive Tupperware so that you can just send people home with it and not worry about it returning to your cabinet? Are you stocked up on foil? This is one of those things that I think we sometimes forget about, that you really don't want to need to worry about digging through your cabinets for things you can send people away with. That was a lot of information in a short window of time. So I hope that at least some of it was applicable for your hosting this year, that you will be able to put some of it to good use. And should you have any questions, you can feel free to contact me on Instagram at Grandmillennial Lifestyle or via email, Allie@thegrandml.com. Happy Thanksgiving, friends!